really want to talk about this past weekend's game here. Everyone's made the joke here. I think they've all incorporated the J. Cole song about hunting wabbits. Went ahead and took care of the South Dakota State University Jackrabbits, which I personally didn't think we'd blow them out the way we did, and I thought we left some points on the table. But what do you guys think about the game?
I thought just considering the hype that was kind of building up around it with how good South Dakota State has been, I thought it was a really impressive performance from Oklahoma State. Obviously, South Dakota State kind of driving on their first drive of the game, misses what seemed to kind of be an easy fourth down conversion. You kind of wonder if they get rolling, if they hit that. But credit to OSU. They get a stop there. Corey Black gets a pick in the next drive, and then the game just kind of felt muffled for South Dakota State from there. So, I thought it was a really impressive performance. A couple of things that, you'd like to see. Ollie maybe with a higher yards per carry average. I don't think that's Ollie's fault. I think we all saw Ollie and saw how impressive he was. And then defensively, big plays were certainly an issue that they gave up. It seems like I've got the stats somewhere, but most of the yards that Oklahoma State gave up were just big chunk plays. So you're not going to totally eliminate those, but I think they had 6 plays of more than 20 yards. South Dakota State did, and if you could cut that down to 1 or 2, I think that certainly you feel a lot better about that going into the rest of the season.
Yeah, I think I've kind of been trying to balance the overhype and underhyping it, just because it's an FCS team, but we know what South Dakota State was going in, 2-time or defending national champions. I don't think that's the same team that they've had the last 2 years. I know they were placed on this year. I don't know if they went a third in a row. But I think I went back to last year. I think it's still a lot better of a team than Central Arkansas was. And they scored, 27 points against Central Arkansas. And we were like, this is not a good team. And even 21, they have Spencer Sanders. You know what you're getting, a good defense. And even then, it was a scary game against Missouri State. So I think people act like this last year's team wasn't very good, but they still won 10 games, and they looked terrible for the season opener. So I think it's confident with the fact we had such high expectations going into this season. I think Saturday at least reassured that with how they looked for South Dakota State. We saw the experience. We saw the run block. Obviously, like Marshall mentioned, could have been better. Because Ollie was still great, but his stats weren't great. He had 100 yards. Not as great. His yards were great for Ollie standards.
All relative.
Yes. But they still kept Bowman up. Bowman wasn't sacked a single time. Bowman looked great. He looked like a 7th-year quarterback. And I think that's all they need to be successful, especially what I think we saw in the Big 12 this week didn't look too scary as well.
Yeah, that Texas Tech game against a college that did not know how to football program, honestly, in Abilene Christian, was one that I was watching all the way down to the end there, and there were a couple other Big 12 games I'd like to point out. But with that being said, I think the Big 12 was undefeated this weekend, except for West Virginia, who was the only team not favored. And Houston lost. Okay. Yeah, so that was I did a game pick'em on another podcast before this week, and that was the one I got wrong then. Crap. Can't believe Houston foiled me there. But with that being said, what do you guys think as far as the defensive side of it? I wish Nick Martin had gotten an interception there that went straight. Literally, I think he just couldn't believe he was throwing the ball basically. But what do you guys think about defensively and how we kind of stumped their quarterback who, on the broadcast, he kept on getting, he was getting offers from Power 4 teams, but ended up staying with South Dakota State to win another championship. But what do you think about how the defense played and how we kind of got to their quarterback?
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast with a South Dakota State guy on it, and I think he said that Northwestern was very interested in Mark Gronowski. I thought what was most impressive about how they kind of shut him down is that he's also known as a runner, but he had 10 rushing attempts for 17 yards. I thought that was big that they were able to kind of contain him. He threw a pick. Honestly, should have been 3 picks. Kendall Daniels had a pick 6. It was a little bit tougher of a play than Nick Martin's, but and unable to capitalize on that. And then obviously hits Nick Martin in the gut. Nick made up for it the next play, getting the sack on I think it was 4th down. So, I thought there was a ton of potential there. It's kind of the first time that we got to see what Kendall Daniels is kind of looking like in this new role of playing closer to the line of scrimmage. You throw Colin Oliver back on the edge. I think that's just where he's best suited to play. I think there was a lot of hope and promise that can be built just based on kind of seeing this iteration of Brian Nardo's defense for the first time. But with that said, too many big plays. Let me see. I've got the stat here. South Dakota State had 388 yards of total offense in 65 plays. But if you cut those 6 plays out of 20 plus yards, they put up 184 yards in 59 plays, which is 3.1 yards a play. So obviously, like cutting that out, it's probably unrealistic to think that you can just totally chop every big play that you're going to give up out. But if you can, not give up 6 of those in a game, I think everybody's feeling a lot more comfortable about where this defense is at. So hopefully, just a couple of things that they need to tweak, some schematics type stuff. But I thought there was promise there. I'm not ready to overreact too much to the big plays, but there's also obviously some stuff that group needs to work on.
Yeah, going off Marshall's court, we were messaging kind of during the game, and I was like, I don't know, not to knock the kid. I think he's good. I think he's a great FCS talent. I don't know that he would be that great of an FBS quarterback after watching him. Maybe he had a bad day. I don't think. I mean, South Dakota State's not going in environments like that. It's probably the worst environment he's ever been in. So I'm sure there's some, he's on his A game if he's not thriving there. Because I thought there were some times when the defense could have had a lot worse numbers, but he kind of messed it up. I think there was a first or second drive. He had a good play on the 3rd down and a good play on the 4th down. The 4th down is when the tight end just kind of ran into someone, but he had someone open to convert the 3rd down. He just kind of missed them. There's another 3rd down I can think of later in the game where he kind of did the same thing. And I think that's a play where, Utah makes it in a couple weeks for sure. And I think the Arkansas quarterback, after watching him Thursday night, makes those plays as well. But I think the biggest concern for me defensively, when we were in the podcast with you a couple weeks ago, Marshall and I both, when you asked us the weakness of the defense, we both mentioned the D-line. And I thought that was, again, maybe not necessarily the D-line, but whatever they need to do, though, to get pressure on the quarterback. Because I don't think, again, it's a solid, strong FCS team. But I would think that's not too much better, if not worse, than most offensive lines that are going to protect quarterbacks even in the Big 12, especially Arkansas next week. And so they've got to learn. I mean, they got to do something to get more pressure on the quarterback because I think they only sacked him twice. They didn't hurry him much. And with the quarterback league you're in, the Big 12, they're going to have to find. That's definitely. They're going to give up a lot of big plays when guys can just sit back there and wait for someone to get open deep.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you there. I'm curious what you guys think about, at least offensively on the other side of the ball, how we were protecting Bowman. I know the pass rush, we didn't really get to them, but it seems like they also really didn't get to us, at least on the passing part of it. Could not agree more on the part of the run blocking, though, as I'm sure I'll ask in a minute. But what do you think as far as like the pass protection and, of course, the heralded 23-year-old average offensive line?
Yeah, I thought it was as far as protecting Allen. I thought they did a really good job. Let's see, was he sacked at all? I don't think he was. No, so it wasn't sacked at all. And Allen's been good, even going back to last year. At even if there is a rush in his face, getting out of the pocket, throwing the ball away. That honestly hurt his completion percentage last season, and that's just, kind of a big gripe that a bunch of people had about him is that you see his completion percentage, but on a decent chunk of those, he's rolling out and just chunking the ball into the stand. So, but yeah, I thought Allen, from the protection the offensive line was giving him, I thought Allen Bowman probably had his best game at Oklahoma State. Maybe the best game not the best game of his college career, because he had some crazy ones that freshman season at Tech, but he just looked really in control. And I don't think you look in control unless you're comfortable in the pocket with those offensive line. They rotated a little bit at left tackle between Dalton Cooper and Isaiah Glass, the Arizona State transfer. I don't pretend to know a ton about offensive line play, but from people that I trust that do, we're pretty impressed with Isaiah Glass. I think he came in. I think he played the whole second quarter and then maybe like the second half of the fourth quarter. So that was pretty good. But yeah, I thought Allen Bowman was just as good as he's been all year, or his entire Oklahoma State career. He didn't have a game last season above 70% completion percentage, completed 74% of his passes. And it started honestly taking a bit of a dip, I think, late. I think, the fourth quarter where a handful of his incompletions were. So, I think it was an incredible day from Bowman in terms of his Oklahoma State career. And I don't think that happens unless, the offensive line is giving him a nice, clean pocket.
Yeah, I agree with Marshall on that. I gave Bowman an A when I did my grades. I know Kyle Cox him the MVP, but not to take anything away from him, he was great, but I don't think he's able to perform that well if not for the offensive line. They were great at keeping them up. Again, just like you said, the flip side of they were able to make big plays, you don't put pressure on them. Bowman able to make big plays because there's no pressure on them. I thought Isaiah Glass was impressive. I'm like Marshall, I'm no expert. I know he had the second highest grade on the team for offensive line from PFF. That's kind of my go-to on knowing how well someone does. So when you have someone like that coming off the bench, I think they're going to be able to protect Bowman pretty well all season. I don't think it's just because they were playing South Dakota State. But yeah, we'll get to the run blocking later. But I think as far as pass blocking, I think you can expect good things from Bowman, from anyone almost, if you get protected that well enough to worry about that.
Well, yeah, on the pass part of it still, Deshaun Stribling I think they had the most yards in the game passing wise, at least reception wise. He didn't have the most amount of targets. I think that was still Presley, if I'm right in saying that. But I want to ask you guys, was Stribling kind of now healthy with the offseason, incorporated fully with Bowman here for the full offseason with him as well? Was he everything you guys thought he would be in his first game?
Yeah, Stribling was, he looked the part again. I went back actually earlier this weekend, and because I knew that I had some takes about Stribling in the 4 games that he played last year. I was like, holy crap, this guy's really good. And then he gets to just kind of cruise under the radar because he was injured last season. He doesn't pop up on the Blitnikoff list despite Owens and Presley doing so. But yeah, I think Stribling is, their best pro prospect outside of Ollie Gordon on this team, just because he's got size. I think he's listed at 6'1". He plays kind of bigger than that. Sort of reminds me of Tylan Wallace. I think the NFL lists Tylan Wallace like 5'11", but watching Tylan Wallace play at Oklahoma State, you're like, this guy's like 6'4" or something like that. So he reminds me of Tylan Wallace in that way. He's got really good feet, Stribling does. Really good hands. We saw that his first or second drive, I forget which one, but the toe drag out on the sideline, that was, I think, probably his most impressive catch of the day. And then as far as Presley goes, they were intentfully getting him the ball, especially that first possession. I think he had 9 or 5 touches maybe in the first possession alone. He finished with 9 targets and 7 catches on the day, but just 35 receiving yards. So it seemed like they might have been keyed in on Presley a little bit, but then that obviously helps those outside guys like Stribling and Owens. If you leave them in one-on-one coverage, it's probably not going to go very well, as we saw with that deep Owens touchdown. So yeah, I thought I was impressed with the receiving core going into the season, especially those top 3 guys. And I left that game just thinking how our team's going to cover these 3, all year long, while also having to prep for Ollie Gordon. So I thought as far as your offensive playmakers, I thought they looked just as impressive as you would want them to.
Yeah, I would agree. We're still going to see like one of those explosion games from Stribling. Like eventually, because even though you're like, oh well, you see this guy, they see a game film, they see they're trying to get the ball, but you see how much they're almost trying to force the ball to Brendan Presley. He touched the ball 5 times, I think, in the very first drive, whether it's the jet pass, screen passes going on. They're trying to find a way. So defenses have to prepare for Brendan Presley, know where he's at all times. And you get Rashad Owens breaking a 50, 60-yard touchdown, you still have to worry about him. And so Stribling's just kind of the third guy, and you just got to be like, well, we're going to double up on Owens, or are we going to worry about Stribling? I think right now, just because, like Marshall said, he's kind of going off the benefit of being injured last year, they're not worrying about him. And eventually he will burn a team. But even when he burns a team, again, I think no matter what, Presley's going to have to be their number one priority for defense. But then Owens could burn you the next game when you're worried about Stribling as well. So yeah, that's a lot to prepare for, especially when not only do you have Ollie run the ball, you have him catching the ball in the backfield and doing the things they did Saturday as well.
Yeah, it was really just impressive overall. I think Stribling almost had that pass where he gets, it seemed like to me, pushed on the sideline and then almost recovers and still gets the play and the catch. But Presley, just time and time again, is just surefire, has great hands. Watching a little bit of the TCU Stanford game, it reminded me a little bit of John Paul Richardson, except for Brennan Presley didn't have a fumble this past game, and of course the TCU guy did. So just want to throw that out there. But I always listen to the Pistols Firing podcast as well too, and the whole deal was Colby and Carson are talking about, hey, well, this guy's going to go off for this many yards. This guy's going to go off for this many yards. I'm like, talking to my dad a little bit about it. I'm like, well, there's only one football. Like, what are we going to do? But then, sure enough, it just seemed like that Bowman, the offensive scheme, Casey Dunn, and everyone was just getting the ball around to everyone. Do you guys think that's more of a just, hey, Bowman was giving it to the guys who were open and reading the plays real well, or is that really Bowman just kind of seeing the offense and having some more maturity in year two, or a combination of it?
Yeah, I think the first drive, I think you scheme those up pretty well. I think the intent was to get Brennan Presley the ball, but then as they kind of moved along, I thought it was more Bowman kind of working through his progressions. There were a couple of times where he's sitting pretty clean in a pocket, stays in there and goes through one or two reads. If they're not there, he's going to hit his check down. So I thought Bowman was doing a good job of not forcing things. There was one play, I think it was in the fourth quarter, almost threw that pick. Talking to him after the game, he was like, he could remember that exact play. He was like, that was stupid. I should have just thrown it away. But aside from that, I thought he was really good at just not, forcing too much. Even on the flea flicker, the big gain from Dijon Stribling, Bowman had said that all week in practice that was going to Rashad Owens. And then he said in the game, he gets the flea flicker back from Ollie. He looks downfield, and Owens has 2 or 3 guys on him. And so he says, okay, somebody else has got to be open. Finds Stribling coming across the middle and hits him. So I thought that was just kind of a example of, how mature, how kind of collected that Bowman seemed. And yeah, I think he was just kind of, taking what the defense gave him. And I think with the weapons that he's got around him, as we've kind of talked about, that's all that he really needs to do this year. I don't think he needs to go out and try and, win games by himself. As cool as that is, I think he just needs to, kind of, play point guard and distribute the ball to those crazy weapons.
Yeah, the one thing that I really took away this past weekend, though, is it seems like Ollie Gordon was used a lot more in the passing game as well than I thought he would be, at least. I mean, of course, the guy's an incredible runner. I don't need to tell anyone that, especially you guys. But what do you think as far as him being used a little bit more in the passing games? He had 5 targets, 4 receptions, and he had that one that it seemed like ESPN was reviewing for 20 minutes. And I don't know if you guys saw it or not, because I know you were at the game. But they were zooming in so far that we were getting pixelated on every single ESPN deal. And I'm like, every single time that they show this is normally just like, hey, catch and move on. The call's got to stand. There's no way to overturn it. We can't see it that well. But what do you guys think about Gordon being used in the passing game as much? Was this an off-season topic that Gundy talked about at all?
Nothing that he mentioned. There were a couple of games last year that Gordon did go off. He had 116 receiving yards against Kansas as part of a crazy day that kind of started that tear that he went on. So I think he's always been good in the passing game. I remember like his going into his senior year of high school. There's like a 7-on-7 clip of him like doing this like Moss-esque one-handed catch in the end zone. So I think it's something that you've got a guy who I think they list him at 6'2". I think he might be a little taller than that. In all honesty, we were talking about in the press box because him and Alan Bowman were standing next to each other, and I think Bowman's listed at 6'3", Gordon's listed at 6'2", but it looked like Gordon was like looking down to talk to Alan Bowman. So I think it's just something that he's just good at, and whenever you've got a quarterback who's comfortable in the pocket, and he's kind of working through reads, I think he's gonna not force things, especially if he's an older guy, and use that check down a little more. And I think it's all the more scary when that check down is Ollie Gordon.
It just adds more weapons for Bowman too as well. I mean, because I do think, kind of going back to how in the world these guys can get their numbers when you talk about so many weapons, and I predicted they're going to have 2,000-yard receivers. But one of the storylines with Ollie Gordon all offseason from Gundy was he wanted to limit his carries. And when we hear that, we think we're going to see more of Sessi or Howland or whoever it may be, the backup running back getting more carries. I think they combined for 4 carries on Saturday, something like that. So I think maybe the more plan for less carries for Ollie is less of giving it to someone else, but more of, hey, we're going to probably just end up throwing the ball more. I think they were in control from the get-go, so you're going to rely on the run game a little more and control things, because we still saw Ollie get well over 25 carries, close to 30 carries, and the 20 mark that Gundy wanted. And that's part of, you're going to throw the ball more. yes, you're going to limit his carries, but I still think he's going to get the ball more in the pass game because you can't just assume, oh, well, every time they're running the ball or passing the ball, we don't have to worry about Ollie Gordon finally. So you still always have to worry about Ollie Gordon when they're throwing the ball now. But I do think we're going to see a lot more, which is crazy because Bowman still threw the ball more than basically anyone once he took over, for sure in the Big 12, and he still wasn't too far behind in the country. And those are behind guys who were starting from day one. So I do think we'll see a lot more of him in the passing game, mainly just because I think we're going to see a lot more from OSU in the passing game to help relieve him a little bit.
Gotcha. Yeah, well, I do want to ask about Sessi and Trent. Although at least there's no way I'm pronouncing Sessi's last name correctly. I don't know if you guys want to take a stab at it or not. You might have it all the way down, but it's just the first game, so maybe I'll ask you after Game 6 about that. Excuse me. But with Sessi and Trent, they combined, for a total of like 11 yards. Weirdly enough, Sessi, because he took a penalty, he has 8 yards. Average is what the split report's given me here. But what do you guys think about their play? Anything really to take away from and seeing them in the game?
Yeah, so whenever Trent, signs on to come to Oklahoma State, I was thinking for sure RB2, just because he literally led Indiana in rushing. He led a Big Ten team in rushing last year. With that being said, I was really impressed with the limited work that Sessi. I've got the pronunciation guide right here. Vailahi. That's what I'm going to go with until proven otherwise. But I was impressed with kind of the limited work that he got last year. He was Gordon's backup in the Big 12 title game because it looked like Jaden Nixon was prepping to go in the portal, at least. So I was impressed with that last year. And then he gets in, before Trent does. And I was like, holy crap, he actually is RB2. And I thought he was very impressive. That play he gets the penalty on. He swings to the outside. Bowman, as we kind of discussed, is looking downfield. He took off to run for a second. And then sees that Valahi's open, and he said, hey, this guy's probably a bit faster than me, dumps it over to him. And the juke move on the sideline that forced that face mask, he basically teleported out of that guy's way. That guy might have blinked and says he wasn't there anymore, so he sticks his arms out, and he was just trying to grab anything but air. I thought Sessi was very impressive. Kind of didn't get a ton of work because you've got Ollie Gordon. I've got 5 carries for 4 yards, which is obviously not all that impressive. But I think if you watch the game and watched kind of Sessi's impact on it, I thought he had the makings of something that's going to be really good. And he had another, I think it was maybe a gain of 1 yard or something like that in the second quarter, where there wasn't a hole there, so he just put his shoulder down and ran directly into that defender. He made sure the defender felt that hit more than he did. So. I mentioned this in 10 Thoughts that he kind of reminded me a little of Jalen Warren, and that he's got the quickness, but if you're going to try and stand in his way, he's not afraid for some contact as well. So I was really impressed with Sessi. Trent, honestly, and didn't get a ton of. I didn't notice him a ton, but he's only got 3 carries. He had a reception for 2 yards, so. I don't think there's any big takeaways that I've got from Howland. I'm not ready to write him off by any means. I think he'll prove valuable as the season rolls on. But yeah, I was really impressed with Sessi, despite maybe his box score numbers not looking as impressive as you might think.
They're definitely going to need to put Sessi in that video game soon, though.
Oh yeah, I don't know. I want to know what happened there. I should have asked him. I don't know if he was at OSU's media day or not, but
he was. He doesn't play it.
Oh, okay, so
he's like, I'll play the video game.
I wonder if there was like an email and he just didn't check it, and so he wasn't in the game. I don't know. And honestly, if that's the case, kind of cool. You're just like, I just know football. Sorry about you.
But I do think going off Sessi, something had to click. I feel like because you see what OSU did in the portal. They go after AJ Green. Well, AJ Green gets hurt. Then they go after Trent Howland. So for some reason, they weren't for sure that, hey, this is going to be our number 2 guy. We want it, whether they're just wanting another bigger guy like Ollie or what. And then when we talked to Trent Howland, Marshall and I talked to him together at OSU Media Days, and it kind of sounded like he came here with the thought of, I'm the RB2. Marshall wrote, he talked about Chuba and all these great, Ollie going to go to the NFL. And he's like, Ollie's going to get this year. He's going to go off to the NFL. I'm going to play behind him for a year. Then next year it's my turn. I get to be the next NFL back from OSU. And so that kind of sounded like that was his thought process. Like he was pretty confident he was number 2. He was going to be the number 1 guy this year. And obviously now if he's struggling to be number 2 right now, he's probably going to be competing to get that number 1 job next year with Sessi as well. So the dude must have just turned a corner or something at some point, fall camp or something, to get over Allen in the depth chart and take over that, because it did seem like they were really reaching to try to find someone to back up Ollie Gordon for the season.
Yeah, and I don't think that it's maybe necessarily a 2 and 3 situation. It's just hard to say with the very limited sample size that we've got so far. But I was glad to kind of see that Sessi had kind of earned that right to compete with those guys. At the very least, you're really intrigued with what this running back room looks like going forward. Because right now going into I've heard really good things about Rodney Fields in fall camp. So right now going into next year, you've got Sessi, you've got Trent, you've got a returning AJ Green, more than likely, and then you've got those young guys, Rodney Fields, and then what do they call it? The other guy's got 3 names, I think, but Jaden Allen Hendricks, boom, came to me. I think if anything, it's kind of exciting for kind of what the future of this room looks like. Obviously, you're going to miss Ollie Gordon a ton next season should he go to the NFL. But with all those other guys that I think are impressive backs within their own rights, I'm kind of excited to see how that plays out moving forward.
Yeah, I gotta say too, I am as well too. I just want to double check with you guys because I think I'm right in saying this, and I think maybe the entire world would be, but there's 0% chance Ollie Gordon comes back next year unless there's some crazy off the field thing or injury. Right? There's just no chance.
I would assume. Yeah, I assume right now that he'd be gone just because A, he's as good as he is, and then B, he's a running back, and that's a position where you don't want your hit card to be punched too much before getting to the NFL. So yeah, and I think that's pretty well understood from a lot of people. But yeah, I think I wouldn't say 0% chance just based on it's so early in the season. Who knows what's going to happen? But yeah, I think the general understanding is that Ollie will be gone after the season.
Gotcha. Okay, and I do have to say, both you guys are incredibly right though. That Sessi juke where he basically just disappears from the defender. Whenever I see people outside of Oklahoma State media tweet about a juke and a face mask and go, hang on, I don't know if anyone saw this watching on ESPN Plus, but it just went crazy. I think it had 100,000 retweets, and all of the Twitter stuff is always funny to me because now I'm supposed to call it X. But with that being said, also want to ask you guys here about the kicking game a little bit. There were 4 punts, 54.5 yards on average, 2 inside the 20, 0 yards returned allowed. It just seemed like we were killing it. Also had a 52-yard field goal as well too out of Logan Carter, who I believe I'm right in saying this, but yeah, this is his first year as a full-time starter too, if I'm saying that right.
Yeah.
Yes. What do you guys think of the game overall?
Yeah, Logan Ward was, I think, a sneaky pick for MVP of the game. He hits the 52. That's obvious. If you'd had that QR code on the back of his helmet, Logan Ward would have made some money. Yeah, the 52-yarder hits a 42-yarder in that first drive. I thought he was, I don't know what I expected out of him, but they bring in Sean Snyder, new kickers and punters coach, and the game 1 returns were very good. Obviously, Logan Ward was very good. Hudson Cock, I believe, pinned South Dakota State on the 2 with his punt. And then West Paul, it's cool that they've got these 2 different punters because then they put West Paul in. He's more of their boomer. And West Paul's average was nearly 60-yard punt average, long of 73. So, yeah, as far as special teams go, just based on what they've got, they started having West Paul doing kickoffs. He was kicking them out of the back of the end zone. You've got a guy hitting 52-yard field goals. You got an Australian pinning guys on the 1. Yeah, I thought, it's obviously not going to get as publicized as, Alan Bowman's game, Ollie Gordon's game, stuff like that. But I thought special teams wise, there were a couple of returns, especially early, that South Dakota State had that Gundy was a little upset about. But from the kicking game in particular, I thought really, really good game 1 for Oklahoma State.
Yeah, I thought Logan Ward was definitely a surprise of the game because thinking about it, that might be the only position where you're like, I don't know what we're going to see out of that, right? And for OSU this season, because of how much they're returning, you lose Alex Hell, and then well, he's good. But then when you make a 52-yarder, when earlier that day, I believe that was his first ever college attempt at a field goal. That was, and he made it, and then he goes 3 for 3 with a 52-yarder. So that's, you would think he's only going to get better from here when you got nerves and everything going on your first time being out there field goal duty. But yeah, I think and that's clutch, right? When you do have a conference with so much parity, I mean, you got to go to K-State, you got to go to Utah. Like, you never know. There's going to be some point there in the season where Gundy's going to be very happy to have a special teams coach and a solid kicker if Logan Ward continues to look like he did Saturday.
Yeah, well, Dekota, I also want to ask you, because I think you might have it just fresh in your mind, but you had a great tweet this past weekend where Josh Ford was I got the tight end's name wrong again, but where OSU only had one player as a freshman play this past weekend, and I think OU had how many, if you remember?
23. So that was, for those that don't know, I cover OU for Sooners on SI, and that was one of my duties for kind of the day after. So for Saturday, normally Sunday, but for our Saturday stuff, was kind of their PFF grades and snap counts, and which we knew going in. They had a very freshman young roster. They're basically the opposite of Oklahoma State right now. They got a guy starting, Jaden Jackson, at defensive tackles, like their first true freshman to start on defensive line in like decades for OU. And here he is, the first year going to the SEC. But yeah, I thought it was crazy when I was like, well, I already did it for OU. Just curious how many people OSU got in. And looking, and Josh Ford was the only guy who made his. And it was funny on the notes when I was looking, because OSU kind of makes it easier to know he does. They'll say this guy made their OSU debut, basically. They put Josh Ward instead of Josh Ford. And I was like, who is Josh Ward? And I looked, and I was like, they had to admit Josh Ford. But yeah, that's just kind of crazy. And, the OSU fans try to act like OU's irrelevant to them. But I thought that was a good comparison, and kind of the extreme of playing 23 freshmen against a low-level FBS team. So you're playing an FCS team. And this is probably the best chance, other than maybe Tulsa, that you're going to play freshmen, and you played one guy on the field.
Yeah, it just seemed wild overall. And Marshall, I want to ask you about one thing here before I move on to Arkansas as well. It seemed bizarre to me as I was looking through all the stats here. OSU only had 6 more yards in total yards comparatively. Did not have control time of possession. Granted, all of this is small potatoes when you win by 24. But anything else to kind of take away? I know you talked about the big plays earlier as well too. But played a pretty darn clean game. No turnovers, 1 penalty, et cetera, but had exactly 3 more passing yards and 3 more rushing yards than the Jackrabbits as well. But anything to take away kind of on the yard disparity here not being much at all?
Not necessarily. We mentioned the big plays. Let me go find the half. I guess OSU. Okay, so in the first half, actually, South Dakota State had more total yards than Oklahoma State did. But it felt like in the second half, Oklahoma State was, and Gundy kind of mentioned this, that they were being a little bit more conservative early and taking time off the clock. And I think at one point he said he wished they would have just gone fast and kind of continued doing what they were doing for a little bit, because in the second half, excuse me, things seemed to kind of get a little disconjointed offensively for Oklahoma State at times. But like you kind of said, small potatoes, I think, in the grander scheme of things. I don't think there's any huge takeaways from that, other than Oklahoma State needs to maybe stop giving up so many big plays.